The day of their wedding in Makoba felt like a dream Awele never wanted to wake from. The small village square was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of spicy jollof rice cooking over open fires. She wore a simple white gown sewn by her aunt, while Tunde stood tall beside her in a crisp bagbada, smiling like a man in love. Everyone said they were perfect for each other, the kind of couple that made people believe in happy endings. When Tunde held her hands and promised to love her, till his last breath, she believed every word. She thought she had found the man who would protect her heart, share her burdens, and grow old with her. But not long after the wedding, the warmth began to fade. Tunde's smile became rare, his words shorter, his touch colder. Nights that used to be filled with laughter turned into long silence. He started coming home late, sometimes smelling of unfamiliar perfume, sometimes not coming home at all. When Awele asked what was wrong, he would brush her off, saying he was tired or busy. She told herself marriage had its ups and downs, but deep inside, she felt something breaking. She would sit alone in their small room, staring at the empty chair where he used to sit beside her, wondering how the man who danced with her under the village moonlight could now act like she was a stranger. The wedding vow she once treasured began to sound like a lie, one that was slowly crushing her heart. The day Awele found out she was pregnant, her heart almost burst with joy. She had been feeling tired for days, and when the small test strip showed 2 bold lines, she covered her mouth and laughed through her tears. This was the news that would bring them closer again, she thought. Maybe this baby would be the bridge that mended the cracks in their marriage. She decided to tell him in a special way, the kind he could never forget. That evening, she cooked his favorite meal, spicy goat pepper soup, soft yam, and chilled zobo. She even wore the yellow wrapper he once said made her look like sunshine. When Tunde walked in, she greeted him with a smile that could light up the whole room. He barely looked at her before sinking into the chair, his eyes glued to his phone. She served the food and sat opposite him, her hands trembling with excitement. "Tunde," she said softly, "you're going to be a father." She expected him to drop the phone, to stand up, to pull her into his arms and laugh the way he used to. But instead, the room went quiet. Too quiet. He kept looking at his phone, scrolling slowly, his jaw tightening. He didn't smile, didn't say congratulations, just murmured, okay. As if she had told him it might rain tomorrow. Her joy began to sink into confusion. She tried to laugh it off, saying they should start thinking of baby names, but he only nodded without meeting her eyes. The phone never left his hand. That night, she lay in bed with one hand on her stomach, whispering to the tiny life growing inside her, trying to convince herself that maybe he was just shocked, maybe tomorrow would be better. But deep down, something felt wrong, as if the news that made her heart dance had placed a heavy chain on him. It was just past midnight when the sharp pains woke Awele from sleep. At first, she thought it was a dream, but then the contractions hit harder, like waves crashing through her body. She shook Tunde awake, gasping, "It's time, the baby is coming." He jumped up, grabbed his keys, and helped her into the car. The ride to Omoda General Hospital felt endless, every bump on the road making her grip the seat tighter. She was sweating, crying, praying under her breath. He kept glancing at her, telling her to just hold on, as they sped through the quiet streets. When they finally reached the hospital, nurses rushed her into the maternity ward. Tunde walked beside the stretcher, his face tense. She thought he would be waiting right outside the delivery room, ready to hold her hand the moment she was done. But when the baby's cry finally filled the room hours later, and she looked around for him, he was gone. No smiling father to welcome their child. No arms to hold her. Just silence. At first, she told herself maybe he had stepped out to get food or buy baby clothes. But minutes turned into hours, and still no sign of him. She asked a nurse to check outside. The nurse came back shaking her head. He wasn't there. Her phone had no messages, no missed calls. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving her with nothing but a newborn wrapped in a thin hospital cloth. That night, as she cradled her baby boy, she felt a deep ache that had nothing to do with labor. She didn't even have a proper blanket for him. She pressed him against her chest to keep him warm, blinking back tears so they wouldn't fall on his tiny face. She had walked into that hospital with hope. She was walking out with a child, and a heart that now knew the meaning of being truly abandoned. Morning light crept through the hospital window, but for Awele, the world still felt dark. Her body ached from the long labor, and every step sent a sharp pain through her legs. She held her newborn close, his tiny cries mixing with the noise of the busy ward. The nurses had already reminded her about the bills, money she didn't have. She had no choice but to sign a promise to pay later. With shaking hands, she adjusted her blood-stained hospital gown, picked up the small bag by her bed, and began the slow walk toward the exit. Outside, the sun was bright and the air was fresh, but she barely noticed. She was thinking about how to get home, how to keep her baby warm, how to survive the next day. She reached the hospital gate, and that's when she saw it, a black car parked just a few meters away. Inside, Tunde was leaning back in the driver's seat, laughing. Not the tired, forced chuckle he sometimes gave her, but a full, carefree laugh. And next to him was a woman with long braids, her manicured hand resting on his arm as she laughed along. For a moment, Awele thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Maybe the pain and exhaustion were making her imagine things. But then Tunde turned slightly, and the sunlight caught his face. The same face that had kissed her forehead at the altar. The same lips that had promised never to leave her side. Her heart clenched so hard she almost dropped her baby. She wanted to scream, to run to the car and demand an answer, but her legs felt frozen. The woman in the passenger seat said something, and Tunde laughed again, starting the engine without once glancing toward the hospital doors. The sound of the car pulling away was louder than the baby's cries in her arms. In that instant, Awele realized he hadn't just left her alone during labor. He had chosen someone else, even as she bled and struggled to bring his child into the world. It wasn't just her gown that was stained that day. It was her heart. The months after leaving the hospital felt like walking through a storm with no umbrella. Awele cried until her eyes burned, but she cried quietly, so her baby wouldn't hear. Days blurred into nights as she sold vegetables in the market, carried her son on her back, and pretended she was fine whenever neighbors asked how she was doing. Inside, she felt empty. She had no one to lean on, no one to fight for her, or so she thought. One afternoon, while taking a short break from the market, she wandered into a free community seminar. She only went in to rest her legs, but what she heard made her sit straighter. A tall woman in a sharp navy suit was speaking with so much fire that even the restless crowd fell silent. Her name was Barrister Kemi. She spoke about women's rights, about how the law could protect mothers abandoned by their husbands, about justice for those who had been wronged. Every word felt like it was aimed straight at Awele's wounded heart. When the seminar ended, Awele almost walked away. She didn't think anyone could help her, not after everything. But something inside her, a small, stubborn spark, made her stay. She walked up to Barrister Kemi, her voice trembling as she told her story. Kemi listened without interrupting, her eyes sharp but kind. When Awele finished, the lawyer leaned in and said, "He thought he could throw you away. Let's show him he picked the wrong woman." That was the moment something shifted. The tears didn't stop overnight, but now they had a purpose. Kemi began guiding her, explaining her rights, showing her how to gather evidence, how to build a case. It wasn't about screaming or chasing him down the street. This would be quiet, calculated, and legal. For the first time since the wedding, Awele felt her back straighten. She wasn't just a woman who had been abandoned. She was a woman about to rise, and this time, she would rise with fire in her hands and the law on her side. Awele learned quickly that revenge didn't always mean shouting or fighting. Sometimes it meant smiling in public while working in silence. With Barrister Kemi's guidance, she began gathering everything she could find. Old bank statements, transfer alerts, text messages he had sent when he still pretended to care. Even small things like market receipts and medical bills became pieces of a puzzle she was slowly putting together. Every night, after feeding her baby, she would sit at the wooden table in her tiny room, flipping through papers with a pen in hand, marking the ones that could speak for her in court. It wasn't easy. Tunde rarely came around, and when he did, he acted as if she was invisible. But that worked in her favor. He never suspected she was building a case that could shatter his life. She learned how to request official copies of bank transactions, and when she compared them, her stomach turned. Money he had promised for their baby's clothes and hospital bills had gone somewhere else entirely. The name on the transactions was familiar, his girlfriend's boutique in Awele market. Awele didn't just stop there. She visited the market one afternoon, blending in with the crowd, pretending to shop. She saw the boutique, racks full of new clothes, shiny glass windows, and the girlfriend laughing with customers. It hurt, knowing those bright dresses had been bought with money meant for diapers and baby food. But instead of storming in, she quietly took photos, noting the shop's address and the exact dates it received money from Tunde's account. By the time 3 months passed, she had a neat folder full of evidence. Bank records, screenshots, photos, written timelines. Every page was a piece of the truth she would soon lay bare. She no longer cried over what he had done. Now she was focused. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a woman sharpening her sword in silence, waiting for the day she would finally draw it. The morning of the court hearing, the air in the small courthouse was thick with chatter. Tunde strolled in wearing a crisp white shirt and polished shoes, his head held high. He greeted a few people with that same easy smile he used to charm everyone in Makoba. In his mind, this was just a formality, a small problem he could brush aside with a few words. He sat confidently in his seat, tapping his fingers on the table, certain that Awele would walk in looking timid and broken, just like she had the last time he saw her. But when the doors opened, the room seemed to shift. Awele stepped in, her back straight, her step steady. She wasn't wearing a faded wrapper or a tired face. She was dressed in a sharp black lawyer's suit, her hair neatly tied back, eyes clear and unshaken. The whispers began instantly, people turning to look at her, surprised. Tunde's smirk faded slowly, like water draining from a bowl. He blinked, as if trying to make sure he was seeing correctly. Barrister Kemi walked in beside her, carrying a thick file. When the judge called the case, Kemi stood and began to speak, her voice calm but firm. One by one, she laid out the evidence. The bank transfers to the girlfriend's boutique, the photos of the shop, the hospital bills left unpaid, the text messages where he promised money but never delivered. Each piece landed like a hammer on Tunde's confidence. The papers were passed to the judge, the gallery murmured, and Tunde shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The more Kemi spoke, the more the truth piled up around him, a wall he couldn't climb. Awele didn't even need to say much. She just sat there, steady and silent, watching him unravel. This wasn't the girl he had abandoned in a hospital bed. This was a woman who had rebuilt herself, and now she had the power to break him, not with tears, but with the truth. When it was finally her turn to speak, the courtroom grew quiet. Awele stood, smoothing her suit jacket, and walked to the witness stand. Her palms were warm, but her heart was steady. She had imagined this moment for months. The day she would look him in the eyes and tell the truth, every word like a blade. She started softly, telling the judge about the night she went into labor. How Tunde had driven her to the hospital, then vanished before she could even hold her baby properly. How she had walked out the next morning in a blood-stained gown, clutching her newborn, only to see him laughing in a car with another woman. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't there to beg for pity. She was there to make sure the truth was heard. Then came the evidence. Barrister Kemi handed her the file, and Awele pulled out the first photo, the boutique in Awele Market, the one built with money meant for her and the baby. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Next were the screenshots of his bank transfers, the exact dates and amounts. Then the hospital records showing unpaid bills under his name, the proof that she had been left with the debt while he funded someone else's life. Tunde shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of the table. She looked straight at him and said, "You left me to die, now watch me win." Her voice was calm, but the weight of those words filled the room. By the time she stepped down from the stand, the energy in the courtroom had changed. The gallery whispered, the judge's expression was hard, and Tunde no longer had the smug smile he walked in with. He had tried to silence her with abandonment, but she had turned her pain into a weapon, and now, every word she spoke was cutting him deeper than he ever expected. The judge's voice was calm, but each word felt like thunder in the silent courtroom. After reviewing the evidence, after hearing every detail from both sides, the decision was clear. This court grants full custody of the child to Mrs. Awele. The defendant is ordered to provide financial compensation for all unpaid medical bills, child support, and damages. Tunde's eyes widened, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, based on the presented proof of fraudulent activity, an arrest warrant will be issued immediately. The room erupted in murmurs. Some gasped, others shook their heads in disbelief. Awele sat still, her hands clasped in her lap, letting the weight of the moment sink in. This was it. The months of quiet planning, the long nights collecting proof, the pain she had carried in silence, all of it had led to this victory. Tunde, on the other hand, looked as if the ground had been pulled from under him. His face drained of color, his lips trembled. "Your Honor, please, this is a mistake," he stammered, but the officers were already stepping forward. Cameras from local reporters clicked rapidly, capturing his every movement. He took one step back, then another, as if he could somehow escape the reality closing in on him. His breathing grew fast, shallow. The whispers in the room seemed to get louder. Then suddenly he clutched his chest, his eyes rolling back. Before anyone could react, he collapsed to the floor with a dull thud. Gasps and shouts filled the courtroom as the officers and a medic rushed to his side. Awele didn't move. She simply watched, her expression calm. She wasn't here for his downfall. She was here for her justice, and she had it. As they carried him out, cameras still flashing, she felt no need to look away. For the first time in a long time, she was no longer the woman who had been abandoned in a hospital bed. She was the woman who stood her ground and won, and the whole world had just witnessed it. Months after the trial, Awele's life looked nothing like the broken days she had once lived through. With the compensation she received, she didn't just rebuild her life, she built something bigger. In Adora village, she opened a small but powerful foundation for single mothers. It was a place where women could come for legal advice, financial support, and most importantly, the courage to stand again after betrayal. She called it the Phoenix home, because every woman who walked through those doors deserved to rise from her ashes. The first time she stood in the little hall she had rented, watching women share their stories over cups of tea, she felt something warm in her chest. This was more than revenge. This was purpose. She had turned her pain into a light for others, and that light was spreading. Her son, Zena, was growing fast, bright-eyed and curious. Every morning before school, he would go to the drawer, take out her old courtroom badge, and clip it to his shirt pocket. He told his friends it was his superhero badge, because it belonged to the strongest person he knew, his mother. Seeing him wear it made Awele smile in a way that reached her soul. She still remembered the nights she cried alone, the hospital gown stained with blood and heartbreak. But now those memories no longer crushed her, they fueled her. She had been abandoned, yes, but she had not stayed down. And every time Zena walked out the door with that badge, it was a quiet reminder to the world. His mother fought, his mother won, and she was never going back to the woman she used to be.